Hi everybody, this is an introductory lecture for the film Convoy we'll be watching shortly. I'd like to give you the cultural context for this so that the film has some sense, makes some sense to you. First thing to understand is that this is not just one cheesy movie, this is a whole set of cheesy movies that came out in the mid to late 1970s, but that they were all responding to a phenomena, a cultural and political dynamic of the time. Movies like Citizen Band, which came out in 1977, the one you're probably most familiar with, Smokey and the Bandit, 1977. Other movies like Cannonball Run or White Line Fever. In all of these films, as in Convoy, law enforcement authority is illegitimate, and the solution and the response, the proper response of good Americans, is to resist that authority. The locus or the focal point for this battle between authority and Americans is the American road, the American highway. I want to explain to you very quickly why that was the case. First of all, there's a whole set of things happening that are making people like cars a lot less. Okay? The first one is, remember that in 1956 the interstate highway system is created. By the late 1960s, these highways are pushing into developed urban areas. They've torn out areas like the South Bronx, where the Central Expressway, the Central Artery is in Boston, happened in the 1950s. And now they're looking at other areas where people are more politically capable of resisting. And so, for example, in New York, something called Westway, the idea to put an interstate highway system, interstate highway along the west side of Manhattan, is stalled in 1973, and eventually by the 1980s it's canceled. But it's stalled by community opposition. By the same token, in 1971, a project in Boston called the Inner Belt Highway, which is again an interstate highway that's going to relieve traffic and cut through Cambridge and Brookline and other neighborhoods, that is also canceled because of public local opposition. So people are starting not to like the interstate highways in the same way that they used to. The other thing is they're responding to a sense of compression, if you will, about their automotive lives. In other words, the government's becoming more involved in their automotive lives, keeping closer tabs on them in their automobiles. One example of this is the safety legislation from 1974, which mandated seatbelt or safety belt interlocks. Now, any of you that has a car now, unless it's a very, very new car, you turn your key. If you don't have your seatbelt on, a buzzer goes off. That buzzer turns off after 8 seconds by law, by congressional law. The reason for that is this 1974 interlock system. In 1974, the Highway Safety Administration, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA as it's called, said, we're going to make it so that all the cars have to be manufactured with interlock devices. That meant that the ignition would not get electricity unless your seatbelt was buckled. The front passenger seatbelts all had to be buckled. People got around this by just buckling their seatbelts or leaving them in place, but people were not happy about that. Okay? And the result is that by law, those buzzer systems, which this was another solution, is not only would your seatbelt not buckle, but if you buckled it and then unbuckled it, a buzzer would go off and stay on all the time. People really, really hated this, and so as I say, by the 1980s, that's gone. The idea that government would step into your automotive life in that way and force you to wear your seatbelt in that way was anathema to people. People really didn't like it. The other thing, the very important thing, is the national speed limit. Until 1974, states are setting their own speed limits. So in Idaho, if they want to say it's 65 miles an hour, they can, and New York can say it's 55 miles an hour or 50 miles an hour, and the federal government doesn't have anything to do with it. In 1973, there is an oil embargo. The United States supports Israel in a war against Arab nations called the Yom Kippur War, 1972, and the OPEC, or oil petroleum exporting countries, get together and decide they will not export petroleum to the United States anymore in protest for American support for their enemy in that conflict. The result is profound in the United States culturally. There are gas lines. In other words, people are waiting in line for gasoline, and there are odd-even regulations, meaning if your license plate ends in an even number, you can get gas on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and if not, if it's an odd number, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, that sort of thing. The reason for those laws is to reduce these gasoline lines. So there's this sense that something's going horribly, horribly wrong with the automotive dream of America. In the film, you will see a couple of things that I'd ask you to pay attention to. One is you'll actually see this 55-mile-an-hour speed limit sign a couple of times, indeed in one scene where a truck drives right over it, which is a great moment. And you can imagine in 1978 when this film came out, an audience cheering. Okay? The other thing you'll see is that authority, as I say, is illegitimate and is, at the end of the day, racist. Whereas the good guys in the film, the heroes in the film, are instead Americans who are sort of kumbaya. They don't care whether you're black or white. You're still a good American, and we're all going to share this together. There are some other specific moments in the film that I may tell you about when I see you on Friday, but that's in about 7 minutes, the cultural context, the cultural moment in which this film happens. And so you can watch it not just as a cheesy flick, but as a historical primary document for the 1970s. Thank you. See you soon.